Kethavar looked at the blue planet through the viewing screen of his ship. The planet was called Earth by the creatures that lived there. He had studied their files for weeks now. The humans were new to space travel. They had only learned to travel between stars a few years ago. This made them babies compared to his own people, the Zentauri. The Zentauri had been traveling the stars for over 10,000 years. They had met hundreds of different alien races. Each time the story was the same. The new species would be excited to meet advanced aliens. Then they would learn about the Galactic Council. The Council kept peace in the galaxy by making sure all species followed the same rules. Kethavar touched the crystal device on his chest that helped him breathe. He had done this job many times before. First contact was always interesting, but it followed a pattern. The new species would ask questions. They would be amazed by advanced technology. Then they would agree to join the galactic community under the guidance of older, wiser races. The human ship approached slowly. It was crude-looking compared to Zentauri vessels. The metal hull showed signs of basic construction. Their engines left energy trails that any child could track. Kethavar almost felt sorry for them. They were so far behind the rest of the galaxy. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the New Frontier. His hands were sweaty inside his gloves. This was the moment every human had dreamed of since they first looked at the stars. Contact with alien life. Jake had been chosen to represent all of humanity in this meeting. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on his shoulders. The alien ship was massive. It gleamed like polished silver and moved without any visible engines. Jake's science officer, Dr. Lisa Chen, stood beside him with her instruments ready. She had been studying the alien signals for 3 days. Their technology was clearly far beyond anything humans had. "They're requesting permission to dock," reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Ryan Brooks. "Their translation seems pretty good." "They're speaking English," Jake nodded. "Grant permission." And Ryan, record everything. This is history in the making. The docking procedure went smoothly. The alien ship extended a flexible tunnel that connected perfectly with human airlock systems. Either they had studied human technology very carefully, or their equipment was smart enough to adapt automatically. Kethavar stepped through the airlock first. The human ship smelled different from what he was used to. There was a metallic tang in the air and something else he couldn't identify. The gravity felt slightly heavier than on his ship. The humans had gathered in what appeared to be their main meeting room. Jake Morrison stepped forward. He was tall for a human, with graying hair and steady eyes. Behind him stood a woman with dark hair holding various scientific instruments and a younger man in a military uniform. "Welcome aboard the New Frontier," Jake said, extending his hand. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison, representing the United Earth government." Kethavar looked at the extended hand for a moment. He had read about this human custom. He reached out and briefly touched the human's hand. The skin was warm and slightly rough. "I am Ambassador Kethavar of the Zentauri Collective. I speak for the Galactic Council in matters of first contact." Dr. Lisa Chen stepped forward eagerly. "This is incredible. We have so many questions. How long have your people been traveling in space? How many other species are there? What kind of technologies do you use for faster-than-light travel?" Kethavar found the humans' enthusiasm amusing but typical. All new species were full of questions. "Your curiosity is understandable," he said. "There is much for your species to learn. The galaxy contains over 400 intelligent species. Many have been part of the galactic community for thousands of your years." Lieutenant Brooks spoke up. 400 species? That's amazing. How do you all get along? There must be conflicts sometimes." "The Galactic Council maintains peace," Kethavar explained. "We have learned that newer species often need guidance. War and conflict come from misunderstanding and primitive thinking. When species mature and accept proper guidance, peace follows." Jake noticed something in the alien's tone. There was a certainty there, as if the matter was already decided. "What kind of guidance are we talking about?" Kethavar activated a small device that projected images in the air between them. The humans stared in wonder at the holographic display. "This is the integration process," he explained. "New species become protectorates of more advanced civilizations. You will be assigned mentors who will help you develop properly. Your military forces will be disbanded, as they are no longer necessary. Your expansion into space will be carefully planned and supervised." The room fell silent. Jake exchanged glances with his officers. "Disbanded? You want us to give up our military?" Of course, Kethvar said, as if explaining something obvious to a child. Primitive species often maintain military forces due to fear and aggression. These emotions come from your evolutionary past. Under proper guidance, you will learn that such forces are unnecessary and dangerous. Dr. Chen asked, "What happens to species that don't want this guidance?" Kethvar's expression didn't change. Such situations rarely arise. When a species truly understands the benefits of integration, they embrace it willingly. The few who resist usually change their minds once they see how much better life becomes under council guidance. Lieutenant Brooks felt a chill run down his spine. And if they don't change their minds? The council has methods to help resistant species see reason, Kethvar replied calmly. But let us not focus on such unlikely scenarios. Your species shows great promise. Dr. Chen, your questions demonstrate the intellectual curiosity that will serve humanity well in the galactic community. Jake tried to keep his voice steady. How long does this integration process usually take? It varies, Kethvar said. Some species adapt quickly and achieve junior membership in the council within a century or two. Others require more time. The Kelvani took nearly 500 years before they were ready for limited self-governance. 500 years? Jake couldn't hide his shock. A brief moment in galactic terms, Kethvar assured him. Your species will benefit greatly from this period of learning and growth. You will be taught proper technologies, shown how to eliminate conflict, and guided away from the destructive tendencies that mark primitive civilizations. Dr. Chen was taking notes rapidly. What kind of destructive tendencies? Territorial aggression, resource competition, political fragmentation, Kethvar listed. Your species currently divides itself into separate nations that compete with each other. This is typical of young civilizations but must be eliminated for galactic citizenship. Lieutenant Brooks stepped closer to Captain Morrison and whispered, "Sir, this doesn't sound like partnership. It sounds like conquest." Jake nodded slightly. He had been thinking the same thing. Ambassador Kethvar, what if humanity prefers to develop at its own pace? What if we want to maintain our independence while still participating in galactic affairs? Kethvar seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. Independence is an illusion, Captain Morrison. No species exists in isolation. The choice is between chaotic, destructive independence and peaceful, guided development. Surely you can see which is better for your people. The meeting continued for another hour, but the tone had changed. The humans asked more careful questions while Kethvar provided answers that seemed increasingly patronizing. He spoke about humanity as if they were children who needed to be protected from themselves. When the meeting ended, Kethvar returned to his ship satisfied. The humans had shown the typical reactions: initial enthusiasm followed by some resistance to the idea of guidance. This was normal. Once they had time to consider the benefits of joining galactic civilization, they would come around. They always did. Back on the new frontier, the three humans sat in silence for several minutes after the alien ambassador left. Finally, Jake spoke. "Gentlemen, lady, I think we may have a problem." Dr. Chen looked up from her notes. "They want to turn us into pets." Lieutenant Brooks nodded grimly. "Worse than pets. At least pets can choose their own food. This integration process sounds like slavery with better technology." Jake stood and walked to the viewing port. The Zentari ship hung in space like a silver thread. "We need to get this information back to Earth immediately. And we need to start asking some very serious questions about what happens to species that say no to the Galactic Council." The age of human innocence in the galaxy had ended before it truly began. 3 months had passed since first contact. Kethvar found himself growing frustrated with the humans. They were not responding to integration the way other species had. Instead of grateful acceptance, they kept asking difficult questions. Instead of dismantling their military as requested, they seemed to be expanding it. Admiral Susan Wright sat across from Kethvar in the conference room aboard the orbital station humanity had built specifically for these meetings. She was a tough woman with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to see right through him. Behind her sat Colonel Pete Davis, a man whose quiet intensity made Kethvar uncomfortable. "Ambassador," Admiral Wright said, "we've been reviewing the historical records you provided about other species that joined the Galactic Council. We have some concerns." Kethvar adjusted his breathing apparatus. "What concerns could you possibly have?" "The records show consistent peace and prosperity for all member species. Dr. Lisa Chen, who had been assigned as humanity's chief science liaison, spoke up. That's just it. The records show peace, but they don't show much else. What happened to the Kelvani military traditions? Where are the Torth exploration fleets? Why don't we see any independent technological development from council member species? Because such things are unnecessary once a species matures, Kethvar replied patiently. The council provides all necessary technologies and maintains all required military forces. Member species are free to focus on art, philosophy, and personal development. Colonel Davis leaned forward. Ambassador, with respect, that's not freedom. That's dependence. What happens if the council makes a decision that a member species disagrees with? Member species learn to see the wisdom in council decisions, Kethvar said. Disagreement usually comes from incomplete understanding. Admiral Wright placed a data pad on the table. We've been trying to contact some of these member species directly. The Kelvani, the Torth, the Mandarin. Do you know what we found? Kethvar felt a slight chill. The council handles all interspecies communication to prevent misunderstandings. We found that these species have no independent communication networks, Wright continued. No military forces, no exploration programs, no research that isn't approved by the council. Ambassador, these aren't member species. They're client states. Your primitive understanding of galactic politics is showing, Kethvar said, his voice hardening slightly. The council system has maintained peace for over 8,000 years. It works because it eliminates the sources of conflict. Dr. Chen pulled up her own display. It works by eliminating independence. Look at this data. Before integration, the Kelvani had developed 17 different types of spacecraft. After integration, they use only council-approved designs. The Torth went from 12 separate nation-states to one unified protectorate that follows council directives exactly. Efficiency, Kethvar insisted. Why waste resources on redundant research when the council can provide optimal solutions? Lieutenant Brooks, who had been promoted after the first contact mission, spoke from his position by the door. Because maybe there's more than one right answer. Maybe diversity of thought and approach makes everyone stronger. Kethvar looked at the young human with something approaching pity. Your species thinks in terms of competition and conflict. You see strength in division because you don't understand unity. The council represents the ultimate evolution of civilization, perfect harmony through wise guidance. Admiral Wright stood up. Ambassador, I'm going to be direct with you. Humanity will not accept this integration process as you've described it. We're willing to join the galactic community as equals, but we won't become a protectorate. The room fell silent. Kethvar stared at the human admiral in genuine shock. In all his years of handling integration, no species had ever simply refused. Admiral Wright, I don't think you understand the implications of what you're saying. I understand them perfectly, Wright replied. We're saying no. Kethvar activated his communication device. Within moments, a hologram of a tall, elegant alien appeared. This was High Counselor Zeltar, one of the most senior members of the Galactic Council. High Counselor, Kethvar said, the humans are refusing integration protocols. Zeltar studied the humans with ancient eyes. This is unfortunate but not unprecedented. Some species require more convincing than others. Humans, you should understand that the galaxy is not a safe place for unguided species. Without council protection, you face threats you cannot imagine. Colonel Davis stepped forward. What kind of threats? Rogue civilizations that have rejected council guidance, Zeltar explained. Pirates and raiders who prey on unprotected worlds. Natural disasters that only advanced council technology can prevent. The galaxy is vast and dangerous. Your primitive weapons and limited technology leave you helpless, Dr. Chen frowned. If the galaxy is so dangerous, how did all these species survive long enough to develop space travel in the first place? Zeltar's expression didn't change, but Kethvar noticed a slight pause. The dangers have increased over time. The Council's protective influence has made some regions safer, but this also concentrates threats in unprotected areas. Admiral Wright crossed her arms. So the very system you've created to provide protection makes things more dangerous for anyone outside it? A simplistic interpretation, Zeltar said. The point remains that your species lacks the capability to defend itself against serious galactic threats. Lieutenant Brooks asked, what happened to the species that refused integration? Are any of them still independent? Another pause from Zeltar. Very few species make such an unwise choice. Those that do typically reconsider once they experience the reality of unguided existence. That's not an answer, Wright pointed out. How many independent species are there? Where are they? Why can't we contact them? Kethavar realized the conversation was moving in a dangerous direction. High Counselor, perhaps the humans need time to consider their position. Indeed, Zeltar agreed. Humans, you have 30 standard days to reconsider. The Council's offer of integration is generous, but it is not unlimited. We have responsibilities to our existing members that prevent us from allowing potential threats to develop unchecked. The hologram faded, leaving the room tense with unspoken implications. Admiral Wright looked directly at Kethavar. Ambassador, was that a threat? It was a statement of fact, Kethavar replied. The Council cannot allow aggressive militaristic species to threaten galactic peace. Colonel Davis laughed bitterly. Aggressive and militaristic? We haven't attacked anyone. We've been nothing but polite and cooperative for 3 months. Your refusal to disarm is aggressive, Kethavar explained. Your insistence on maintaining separate national governments is evidence of militaristic thinking. Your questions about contacting other species show expansionist tendencies. Dr. Chen shook her head. You're describing normal behavior for any intelligent species as if it were a crime. It is primitive behavior that leads to conflict, Kethavar insisted. The Council has eliminated such behaviors among its members. This is why we have peace. Admiral Wright moved toward the door. Ambassador, I think this meeting is over. We need to report back to our government. As the humans filed out, Kethavar felt a growing unease. This was not following the normal pattern. Species were supposed to be grateful for the opportunity to join galactic civilization. They were supposed to see the wisdom in Council guidance. The humans seemed to view it as a form of imprisonment. Later that day, Kethavar received a priority message from the Council's military command. Human ship movements were being monitored throughout their space. Instead of preparing to disarm, they were building more ships. Instead of centralizing their government, they were coordinating between all their separate nations. Most disturbing of all, human probe ships had been detected near the borders of Council space, apparently trying to make contact with species that had refused integration. This was completely unprecedented behavior. Kethavar tried to push away his growing doubts. The humans were simply more stubborn than most species. Once they faced the reality of Council military power, they would see reason. They had to. The alternative was unthinkable. But deep in his mind, a small voice whispered a question that terrified him. What if they didn't? The galaxy had operated on certain assumptions for thousands of years. One of those assumptions was that no species would be foolish enough to fight the entire Galactic Council. Another was that primitive species would naturally want the guidance of their betters. The humans seemed determined to challenge both assumptions. Kethavar looked out at the blue planet Earth, now ringed with human defense stations and patrol ships. For the first time in his career, he wondered if the Council might have encountered something they weren't prepared to handle. The humans weren't just refusing integration. They were preparing for war. President Gary Henderson stood before the combined assembly of the United Nations. Every nation on Earth had sent representatives. The chamber was packed with delegates who normally spent their time arguing about trade disputes and border conflicts. Today they faced something that made their earthly problems seem small. Ladies and gentlemen, Henderson began. 3 days ago, the Galactic Council delivered an ultimatum. We have 27 days left to surrender our sovereignty or face what they call corrective measures. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Henderson raised his hand for silence. I want everyone to understand what we're facing. The aliens have technology that's centuries ahead of ours. They control hundreds of worlds. Their fleets could probably destroy our entire planet without much effort. A delegate from Germany stood up. Then why are we even considering resistance? Surely some form of autonomy under their system is better than extinction. Henderson nodded grimly. Dr. Chen has prepared a report on what integration actually means. Doctor? Dr. Lisa Chen walked to the podium with a thick folder of documents. We've analyzed the historical records the Zentari provided, along with information we've gathered from our own investigations. Integration isn't partnership. It's absorption. She activated a holographic display showing various alien worlds. Every species that has joined the Council follows an identical pattern. First, they disarm completely. Then they adopt Council technology exclusively. Within 50 years, they stop developing their own solutions to problems. Within 100 years, they stop asking questions. Within 200 years, they become completely dependent on council guidance for everything. Another delegate called out. But they achieve peace. They achieve silence, Chen corrected. There's a difference. We managed to make brief contact with a Kelvani individual before council communication blocks stopped us. Do you know what they told us? They said they couldn't remember why their ancestors had wanted to explore space. The chamber fell quiet. Henderson stepped back to the podium. The council doesn't preserve species. It domesticates them. And that's assuming they keep their promise. We've identified at least 6 species that simply vanished from the records after refusing integration. Colonel Pete Davis approached the podium. His uniform was different now. He had been promoted to general and put in charge of Earth's defense planning. The president has asked me to brief you on our military situation. The truth is, we can't win a conventional war against the council. Murmurs of fear rippled through the assembly. Davis continued. However, we might be able to make ourselves too expensive to conquer. Every military leader on Earth has been working on this problem. We have a plan, but it requires total commitment from every nation. The British representative stood. General, are you seriously suggesting we fight a galactic empire? I'm suggesting we make them pay such a high price that they decide we're not worth the trouble, Davis replied. But yes, if necessary, we fight. Henderson retook the podium. I want every person in this room to understand the choice we're making. If we surrender, humanity as we know it ends. We become pets in a cosmic zoo. Our children will grow up never knowing what it means to be truly human. The Russian delegate called out. And if we fight? We might die, Henderson admitted. But we die as free people making our own choices. Meanwhile, in space above Earth, Kethvar watched the planet's military preparations with growing alarm. Human ships were launching constantly. Mining vessels were being converted into weapons platforms. Civilian spacecraft were being armed with improvised weapons. Most disturbing of all, the humans weren't concentrating their forces for defense. Instead, they were spreading out across their entire star system and beyond. It was as if they were planning to fight everywhere at once. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks, now Captain Brooks, commanded one of the new human attack ships. His vessel, the Fighting Spirit, was typical of human space warfare thinking. It was fast, heavily armed for its size, and built to take damage. More importantly, it was designed to be operated by a small crew if necessary. Brooks was reviewing tactical plans with his engineering officer, Commander Amy Rodriguez. She had been promoted rapidly due to her innovative work adapting human technology for space combat. The aliens expect us to fight defensively, Rodriguez explained, pointing at holographic battle plans. They think we'll try to protect our homeworld. Instead, we're going to hit them everywhere they're not expecting it. Brooks nodded. Simultaneous strikes on their industrial centers, communication hubs, and supply lines. Make them defend everything instead of concentrating on attacking us. It's insane, Rodriguez admitted, but it might work. They've been used to overwhelming primitive species with superior technology. They're not prepared for an enemy that refuses to follow conventional tactics. Back on Earth, Dr. Chen worked frantically in her laboratory. She had teams of scientists analyzing every piece of council technology they could get their hands on. Their goal was simple: find weaknesses. The problem with advanced technology is that it's complicated, she explained to her assistant, Dr. Kevin Murphy. The more complex a system is, the more ways it can break. We just need to find the right pressure points. Dr. Murphy looked at the alien shield generator they had been studying. Their defensive systems are incredibly sophisticated, but they seem to be designed to stop energy weapons and kinetic projectiles. I don't think they're prepared for some of our more creative approaches. Chen smiled grimly. Chemical weapons? Biological agents? Even simpler, Murphy replied. Old-fashioned explosives in places they don't expect them. Their technology is designed to fight other high-tech civilizations. I don't think they know how to deal with someone who uses primitive methods because primitive methods are what works, General. Davis met with his counterparts from every major military on Earth. The room contained more military firepower and experience than had ever been gathered in one place. American, Russian, Chinese, British, French, German, Indian, and dozens of other military leaders sat around a single table. Gentlemen, ladies, Davis began, we have 3 weeks to turn our entire species into a military force. Every ship, every weapon, every person needs to be ready to fight. The Chinese General Wang Li spoke up. General Davis, even with total mobilization, we cannot match their numbers. We don't need to match their numbers, Davis replied. We need to make them bleed for every inch. Make it cost more to conquer us than we're worth. The Russian general, Viktor Petrov, leaned forward. What about civilian casualties? This strategy will put every human at risk. Davis was quiet for a moment. General Petrov, if we lose, there won't be any humans left anyway. Not the way we understand humanity. The Council doesn't kill species, they hollow them out from the inside. Our children would grow up as slaves who think they're free. The meeting continued for hours. Plans were made for converting civilian infrastructure into military assets. Protocols were established for guerrilla warfare in space. Supply chains were organized to support extended combat operations. Most importantly, they planned for failure. Hidden bases were established throughout human space. Critical information was scattered and protected. Even if Earth fell, the war would continue. On the alien ship, Kethvar received daily reports that made no sense to him. Human military buildup continued at an impossible pace. Their industry had shifted entirely to weapons production. Even their civilian population was receiving military training. They're militarizing their entire species, his aide reported. Every human between the ages of 16 and 60 is being trained for combat operations. Kethvar stared at the reports in disbelief. This is madness. They must know they cannot win. Perhaps they plan to surrender at the last moment, his aide suggested. This might be an elaborate negotiating tactic. But Kethvar had spent months studying humans now. He had seen their stubbornness, their refusal to accept simple truths. A terrible possibility was beginning to form in his mind. What if they weren't planning to surrender? What if they really intended to fight? The galaxy had not seen a major war in over 1,000 years. The Council's overwhelming power had made conflict pointless. Species either joined willingly or were absorbed with minimal resistance. But the humans seemed to be preparing for something that hadn't happened in galactic civilization for millennia. Total war. Kethvar tried to push away his doubts. The humans were primitive. They would see reason when faced with Council military might. They had to. But as he watched another squadron of human attack ships practice combat maneuvers, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything the Council thought they knew about warfare was about to be tested by a species that had never learned when to quit. The countdown continued. 24 days until the ultimatum expired. 24 days until the galaxy learned whether humanity would kneel or fight. Looking at the preparations below, Kethvar suspected he already knew the answer. The day of the ultimatum arrived with no fanfare. President Henderson sat in the Situation Room, deep beneath the Capitol, surrounded by military leaders and government officials. On the main screen, Ambassador Kethvar's image waited for humanity's final answer. President Henderson, Kethvar said, his voice carrying the weight of galactic authority. The 30 days have passed. The Galactic Council requires your answer. Will humanity accept integration, or must we proceed with corrective measures? Henderson looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. General Davis gave him a slight nod. Admiral Wright's expression was stone cold. Dr. Chen clutched her research folder, filled with everything they had learned about Council technology and tactics. Ambassador Kethvar, Henderson replied, his voice steady. I speak for all of humanity when I say this. We reject your ultimatum. We will not surrender our freedom for the promise of peace. If that makes us primitives in your eyes, so be it. Kethvar closed his eyes for a moment. He had hoped, even at the last second, that the humans would see reason. President Henderson, you are condemning your species to unnecessary suffering. The Council's military power is beyond your comprehension. Maybe it is, Henderson agreed. But our freedom is worth any price we have to pay. The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, General Davis activated the global communication system. Across Earth and throughout human space, military commanders received a single coded message. The die is cast. Within minutes, humanity was at war. Kethvar stood on the bridge of the Council dreadnought Eternal Peace as the fleet moved toward Earth. The assembled force was massive. Over 300 ships representing the combined military might of dozens of species. It was more firepower than had been assembled in centuries. Fleet Commander Veltar, a veteran of dozens of integration operations, approached Kethvar. The humans cannot possibly resist this force. They have perhaps 50 combat vessels, We have brought enough ships to conquer a dozen worlds. I fear we may need them all, Kethavar replied quietly. Veltar looked surprised. Surely you don't believe these primitives pose a real threat? Before Kethavar could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. A communications officer called out, "Fleet Commander, we're receiving reports of attacks throughout Council space." The main display lit up with emergency signals from across the galaxy. Human strike forces were hitting Council facilities everywhere at once. Mining stations, communication relays, supply depots, and industrial centers were under attack. Impossible, Veltar breathed. They don't have enough ships for attacks of this scale. They've converted their entire civilian fleet, Kethavar realized. Every cargo ship, every mining vessel, every transport, they've all been turned into weapons. On the display, they watched as a human cargo ship rammed itself into a Council communication station. The explosion took out the entire facility and left that sector of space without long-range communications. They're sacrificing their ships, Veltar said in shock. They're ramming our installations. Captain Brooks commanded one of the human strike teams hitting Council territory. His target was an automated mining facility that supplied raw materials to Council shipyards. The plan was simple. Get in fast, plant explosives, and get out. But as his ship approached the facility, they encountered unexpected resistance. Council security forces had been increased in response to human threats. Brooks found himself facing 3 enemy patrol ships. "Captain," his weapons officer called out, "we can't fight all 3 and complete the mission?" Brooks looked at his crew, 5 people who had volunteered for what everyone knew was likely a suicide mission. "Then we make a choice. Rodriguez, can you get the explosives to the target if I keep those ships busy?" Commander Rodriguez nodded grimly. "If you can give me 5 minutes, I can take out their entire facility." "You'll have your 5 minutes," Brooks promised. The fighting spirit charged directly at the Council ships, all weapons firing. Brooks had no intention of winning the fight. He just needed to buy time. The human ship took massive damage but kept fighting, drawing the enemy's attention away from Rodriguez's demolition team. When the mining facility exploded, it took part of Brooks's ship with it. The fighting spirit was crippled, but the mission was complete. As Council rescue ships arrived, Brooks transmitted a message that was picked up throughout the sector. "Remember us." Those 2 words became a rallying cry that spread across human space. Back at Earth, the Council fleet finally arrived to find the solar system apparently defenseless. Admiral Wright had pulled most of her ships back beyond the asteroid belt, leaving only automated defense platforms and a few patrol vessels. "Where are their ships?" Veltar demanded. The answer came when human forces erupted from hiding places throughout the solar system. They had been waiting in the asteroid belt, behind moons, and in the shadows of gas giant planets. The humans had turned their entire star system into a trap. Captain Amy Rodriguez commanded the defense of Earth's moon. Her ship, the New Hope, was one of the newer human vessels designed specifically for this war. It was fast, tough, and carried experimental weapons based on Dr. Chen's research. "Enemy ships are entering lunar orbit," her sensor officer reported. "Count is 12 heavy cruisers and 40 escort vessels." Rodriguez smiled grimly. "Time to test our new toys. All ships, execute Plan Thunderbolt." The human ships emerged from lunar caves and surface installations, firing weapons the Council had never seen before. Instead of energy beams or kinetic projectiles, the humans were using guided missiles filled with primitive chemical explosives. The Council ships' shields were designed to stop sophisticated energy weapons. They were not prepared for chunks of metal filled with explosives that detonated on contact. Several alien ships took critical damage in the first few seconds of combat. "Their weapons are primitive," Veltar observed, "but effective. Our shields are not calibrated for this type of attack." Kethavar watched the battle with growing horror. The humans were fighting with a ferocity he had never imagined. When their ships were damaged, the crews kept fighting. When their weapons were destroyed, they used their ships as weapons. Dr. Chen's research had paid off in other ways, too. Human boarding parties were using chemical weapons that Council personnel had no protection against. Smoke grenades filled with tear gas cleared alien ship corridors in minutes. Simple pepper spray became a terrifying weapon against species that had never encountered such crude but effective tactics. The battle for Earth's moon raged for hours. The Council forces had superior technology. But the humans had prepared extensively and were fighting for their homes. Every crater had been turned into a fortress. Every cave system hid weapons and supplies. When Colonel Davis led the defense of the lunar South Pole, he found himself cut off from retreat with a dozen wounded soldiers. Council forces were closing in from 3 directions. A reasonable commander would have surrendered to save his men's lives. Instead, Davis gathered his remaining explosives and headed for the enemy command post. His final transmission was heard throughout the human fleet. For our children's freedom, the explosion that followed took out the entire Council landing force and opened a gap in their lines that human reinforcements exploited. Kethavar realized that something fundamental had changed in his understanding of warfare. The Council had fought many campaigns, but they had always been against civilized opponents who understood when they were beaten. The humans seemed to have no concept of acceptable losses. Fleet Commander, a communications officer, reported, "We're receiving surrender requests from 17 human vessels." Veltar looked relieved. Finally, they're seeing reason. But Kethavar felt a chill as he listened to the surrender messages. They weren't surrenders at all. They were requests for Council ships to come close enough for boarding actions. The humans were using fake surrender as a tactic to get their soldiers onto alien ships. "They're not surrendering," he whispered. "They're laying traps." As the first day of war ended, both sides counted their losses. The Council had superior technology and numbers, but they had suffered casualties on a scale they hadn't experienced in centuries. The humans had lost nearly half their fleet, but they had proven something that shocked the galaxy. They could make the Council bleed. Reports from across Council space told the same story. Human forces were causing massive damage before being destroyed, but more importantly, they were inspiring other species to ask questions. If primitive humans could fight the mighty Council, what did that say about Council invincibility? Kethavar stood alone on the observation deck of his ship, looking down at the blue planet that had started this war. Smoke and fire marked battle sites across Earth's surface. The orbital stations were damaged but still fighting. For the first time in his life, Kethavar wondered if the Council might actually lose a war, not through superior strategy or technology, but through the simple refusal of an enemy to accept defeat. The humans had taught the galaxy something it had forgotten. Sometimes the spirit matters more than the weapons. 6 months into the war, Kethavar barely recognized the galaxy he had known all his life. The conflict that was supposed to end in days had become a grinding nightmare that seemed to have no end. Reports arrived daily from across Council space, each one worse than the last. The humans had done something unprecedented. They had made war personal. On the bridge of the command ship, Fleet Commander Veltar studied casualty reports with growing disbelief. In the Kepler sector, a single human ship disabled an entire supply convoy using improvised weapons. In the Vega system, human commandos destroyed 3 orbital platforms before anyone even knew they were there. Kethavar looked at the tactical display showing human operations across Council space. Red markers indicated successful attacks. There were hundreds of them. How are they maintaining such widespread operations? They can't have enough ships for all this. The answer came from an intelligence report filed by Council forces in the Proxima sector. The humans are not just using military vessels, the report stated. They're converting everything that can carry a weapon or an explosive. Cargo containers become guided missiles. Passenger shuttles become boarding craft. Even individual humans in spacesuits are being used as weapons. Veltar read the report aloud. Human boarding party consisted of 6 individuals in basic spacesuits. They used cutting tools to breach our hull, then filled our ship with toxic smoke using simple chemical devices. Our crew was forced to abandon the vessel, which the humans then used as a bomb against our supply depot. They're using terror tactics, Kethavar observed. "No," came a voice from behind them. Dr. Chen had been captured 3 weeks earlier when her research station was overrun. The Council had been trying to interrogate her about human military plans. "We're using everything we have because we have no choice." Veltar turned to face the human prisoner. "Dr. Chen, your species is fighting a war you cannot win. Why continue this pointless resistance?" Chen smiled grimly. "Because you don't understand what you're fighting. You think this is about military victory. For us, this is about who we are as a species. Every human who dies fighting you becomes a symbol for every other human. You can't kill an idea with superior technology. Kethavar felt a chill at her words. The humans weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting to prove something to themselves and to the galaxy. On Earth, President Henderson met with what remained of the human government in a bunker deep underground. The planet's surface was scarred with battle damage, but the orbital defenses still held. More importantly, human morale was stronger than ever. The casualty reports are heavy, General Davis admitted. We've lost over 60% of our original fleet. But Council losses are mounting too. Their military wasn't designed for this kind of extended combat. Admiral Wright brought up new intelligence reports. We're getting messages from other species throughout Council space. Some are asking questions about independence. Others are beginning to resist Council control in small ways. Henderson nodded. The psychological impact is spreading. Beyond our wildest hopes, Wright confirmed. The Torth have begun refusing some Council directives. The Mandari are asking for communication access to other species. Even some Kelvani colonies are requesting military training. Dr. Murphy, working from a mobile laboratory, provided the most encouraging news. We've successfully reverse-engineered several Council technologies. Our new shield systems can stop their energy weapons, and our enhanced engines give us mobility they weren't expecting. But the war's true nature was revealed in individual actions that showed human determination. Captain Amy Rodriguez found herself in command of the lunar defense after her superiors were killed in action. Her forces were outnumbered 3-1, with no possibility of reinforcement. Instead of retreating, Rodriguez ordered her ships to charge directly into the Council formation. All ships, she broadcasted on an open channel. Remember why we fight. For our children who deserve to grow up free. For our ancestors who never got to see the stars. For everyone who comes after us. The attack that followed defied every principle of space warfare. Human ships rammed Council vessels. Damaged human craft used their reactors as bombs. Rodriguez herself, with her ship crippled and life support failing, managed to crash into the Council flagship's bridge. The last message received from Rodriguez was 2 words: remember us. Those words had become more than a battle cry. They were spreading throughout the galaxy as other species learned about human sacrifice and determination. Kethavar received a priority message from the Council homeworld. High Counselor Zeltar appeared as a hologram, his usually calm demeanor showing cracks of strain. Ambassador, the human resistance is having effects we did not anticipate. Several member species are questioning Council policies. There have been 3 separate requests for independent military forces. 2 colonies have declared themselves neutral in the conflict. The humans are inspiring rebellion, Kethavar realized. More than that, Zeltar continued, they're making other species remember what independence felt like. The psychological damage they're causing to our authority may take centuries to repair. What are your orders? Kethavar asked, though he dreaded the answer. End this war quickly. Use whatever force is necessary. The example the humans are setting cannot be allowed to spread further. The Council's response was swift and terrible. Massive fleets converged on human space from across the galaxy. Weapons that had been held in reserve for millennia were brought out of storage. The message was clear. Humanity would be crushed so thoroughly that no other species would ever consider resistance. But the humans had anticipated this escalation. As Council forces massed for a final assault on Earth, Admiral Wright implemented humanity's most desperate plan. Every human ship still capable of travel received the same order: execute Protocol Omega. Across the galaxy, human forces abandoned defensive positions and concentrated into strike groups. Their target wasn't military installations or supply lines. They were going directly for Council population centers. They're attacking civilian targets, Veltar reported in shock. No, Dr. Chen corrected from her cell, having overheard the communications. We're attacking the same kind of targets you've been attacking. The difference is we call them military targets when you hit our cities. The truth was more complex than either side wanted to admit. The humans were targeting the infrastructure that kept Council civilization running. Power plants, communication centers, transportation hubs, all the things that an advanced society needed to function. But they were also sending a message. If humanity was going to die, they would make sure the Council paid a price that would be remembered for 1,000 years. Captain Brooks, somehow still alive after 6 months of continuous combat, led one of the strike groups heading for the Zentari homeworld. His ship was barely held together with emergency repairs and spare parts. But his crew's determination had only grown stronger. Sir, his sensor officer reported, we're detecting massive defensive installations around the target planet. They've got more firepower than our entire fleet. Brooks studied the tactical display. They're defending like they expect a conventional attack. But we're not going to fight their defenses. We're going to go right through them. The plan was insane even by human standards. Brooks's strike group would use the gravity wells of the outer planets to build up speed, then punch through the defensive perimeter at maximum velocity. Half the ships would be destroyed in the approach, but the survivors would reach the planet. As the strike group accelerated toward the Zentari homeworld, Brooks opened a communication channel to all human forces in the sector. This is Captain Brooks to all human ships. Today we prove that freedom is worth any sacrifice. Today we show the galaxy that humanity will never kneel. Whatever happens next, they will remember us. The response came from every human vessel in range, hundreds of voices speaking in unison. Remember us. Kethvar watched the attack unfold with a mixture of horror and unwilling admiration. The humans were throwing away their lives with casual determination, but they were also accomplishing the impossible. Several strike groups actually reached their targets. When the explosions lit up the Zentari homeworld's night sky, Kethvar finally understood what the humans had been trying to tell them from the beginning. Some things were more important than survival. Some principles were worth dying for. And sometimes the willingness to sacrifice everything was the greatest weapon of all. The war was far from over, but the galaxy had changed forever. The myth of Council invincibility was broken. The idea that advanced civilizations always triumphed over primitive ones had been shattered by a species that refused to accept defeat. Kethvar looked at the stars and wondered what other assumptions about the universe were about to be proven wrong. 1 year into the war, the galaxy was burning. What had started as a simple integration operation had become the largest conflict in recorded galactic history. Kethvar stood in the ruins of a council research station, looking at the damage a single human assault team had caused. The facility had been protected by shields that could stop starship weapons. It had been guarded by automated defenses that tracked anything larger than a spacesuit. Yet somehow 6 humans with improvised equipment had penetrated all of it and destroyed research that had taken decades to complete. How did they get past the shields? Demanded Dr. Yelnari, the station's former director. Kethvar examined the breach point. They didn't go past the shields. They went under them. Look at this. He pointed to a tunnel that had been dug through the asteroid the station was built on. They spent days digging through solid rock with mining equipment to reach the station's foundation. That's impossible, Yelnari protested. No civilized species would endure such conditions for a military objective. The humans aren't civilized by our standards, Kethvar replied quietly. That's what makes them so dangerous. The evidence was everywhere. Human forces had adapted to Council technology in ways that defied logic. When Council shields proved effective against human weapons, the humans started using their ships as guided missiles. When Council sensors could track human vessels, the humans learned to hide inside asteroid fields and comet trails. Most disturbing of all, they had learned to use Council technology against itself. Captured alien equipment was quickly studied, reverse-engineered, and improved upon. The humans seemed to have an instinctive understanding of how to make advanced technology work better. Admiral Susan Wright stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Defiant Spirit, watching Council forces retreat from the Alpha Centauri system. It was the first time in the war that human forces had achieved a clear strategic victory. Admiral, her tactical officer reported, the enemy fleet is withdrawing beyond the heliopause. They're abandoning their forward bases. Wright allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. How many ships did we lose? 47 vessels destroyed, 31 damaged but repairable. The numbers were still heavy by human standards, but they represented something new. For the first time, human forces had won a battle without sacrificing their entire fleet. The combination of captured Council technology and human tactical innovation was finally paying off. Dr. Murphy contacted Wright from the research vessel Breakthrough. Admiral, we've completed analysis of the captured Council database. You need to see this immediately. The information that Murphy's team had discovered changed everything. The Council's military power wasn't as overwhelming as they had claimed. Much of their technology was thousands of years old, maintained rather than improved. Their forces were spread thin across hundreds of worlds, and they had grown complacent from centuries of easy victories. They're not invincible, Wright realized. They've just been fighting species that gave up too easily. More importantly, the database revealed something that explained human success. Every other species that had been integrated had possessed advanced technology and sophisticated military doctrine. When faced with superior council forces, they had fought conventionally and lost conventionally. Humans, starting from a position of technological inferiority, had been forced to innovate constantly. They couldn't rely on standard tactics, so they had developed completely new approaches to warfare. The psychological impact was spreading throughout council space. On the Torth homeworld, demonstrations demanded the right to maintain independent military forces. Kelvani colonies began refusing council taxation without representation. Even some Zentari were questioning whether the council system truly provided the benefits it promised. High Councilor Zeltar convened an emergency session of the full council. Representatives from 300 species gathered in the ancient chamber that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. The human conflict has exceeded all projections, Zeltar announced. What should have been a minor police action has become a threat to the stability of our entire civilization. Councilor Vextar of the Mandaree spoke up. Perhaps it's time to consider negotiation. The humans have proven they cannot be easily conquered. Negotiation with primitives sets a dangerous precedent, argued Councilor Kethnol of the Rigel Confederation. If we appear weak, other species will follow the human example. Other species are already following the human example, Vextar pointed out. The question is whether we adapt to new realities or maintain policies that are clearly failing. The debate continued for hours, but the underlying truth was becoming clear. The Council's authority depended on the belief that resistance was futile. The humans had shattered that belief. On Earth, President Henderson received visitors that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. A secret delegation from the Torth Empire had arrived under diplomatic immunity, seeking private talks about mutual cooperation. President Henderson, the Torth ambassador began, my government is prepared to offer assistance to your war effort. Henderson was cautious. What kind of assistance? Technical data, strategic intelligence, and possibly material support. In exchange, we ask only that you remember the Torth as friends when this conflict ends. It was the first crack in the Council's united front. Within weeks, similar offers arrived from other species. Some were overt, others carefully hidden. The galaxy was choosing sides. Captain Brooks, now commanding a squadron of mixed human and alien vessels, led a joint operation against a Council stronghold. His force included Torth raiders, Kelvani scouts, and even a few Zentari defectors who had become disgusted with Council policies. All ships, Brooks broadcasted, remember that we fight not just for humanity, but for the right of all species to determine their own destiny. The battle that followed was unlike anything seen before in galactic warfare. Multiple species working together, each contributing their unique strengths. Torth vessels provided heavy firepower, Kelvani ships used their stealth technology for reconnaissance, and human forces coordinated the assault with their characteristic aggression. Kethvar found himself questioning everything he had believed about galactic civilization. The Council claimed to represent order and peace, but that order was maintained through the threat of force. The peace existed only because dissent was crushed before it could grow. The humans had exposed the fundamental weakness in the Council system. It worked only as long as everyone agreed to participate. Once a species decided the benefits weren't worth the cost, the entire structure became vulnerable. Worse yet, from the Council's perspective, the humans were winning converts not through force but through example. Other species saw humans fighting for principles they believed in, and they began to remember principles of their own. Dr. Chen, who had been transferred between various Council facilities as they tried to extract useful information from her, found herself with an unexpected opportunity. During a prisoner transfer, her transport was attacked by human forces. In the confusion, she managed to escape and make contact with the rescue team. Dr. Chen, the team leader said, we've been looking for you for months. I've learned something important, Chen replied urgently. The Council's technology isn't just advanced, it's specialized. They've optimized their systems for fighting other advanced civilizations. That's why our primitive approaches work so well. They literally don't know how to defend against tactics they consider obsolete. The information Chen provided led to a new phase of human strategy. Instead of trying to match Council technology, human forces began deliberately using older, simpler approaches. Chemical rockets instead of antimatter drives, kinetic weapons instead of energy beams, radio communications instead of quantum entanglement. The results were devastating for Council forces. Their countermeasures and defensive systems had been designed to stop sophisticated attacks. Simple, direct approaches bypassed their defenses entirely. Admiral Wright stood in the command center on Luna, looking at tactical displays that showed the changed state of the war. Human forces controlled several star systems. Allied species were openly supporting the rebellion. Council forces were on the defensive for the first time in millennia. "Admiral," her intelligence officer reported, "we're receiving communications from Council territory. Multiple species are declaring independence. The Torth have formally withdrawn from the Council. The Mandari are demanding new representation." Wright smiled grimly. The revolution is spreading. But she knew the war was far from over. The Council still possessed overwhelming military superiority in terms of raw numbers and advanced technology. However, they were learning that superior technology meant nothing if you didn't know how to use it against an enemy who refused to follow the rules. Kethvar received new orders from the Council High Command. They were preparing for something called Final Solution Protocol, the complete destruction of human space using weapons that had been banned for thousands of years. As he read the orders, Kethvar realized that the Council was prepared to commit genocide rather than admit they had been wrong about the nature of galactic civilization. The humans had forced the galaxy's oldest government to reveal its true nature. Behind the promises of peace and prosperity lay the willingness to destroy anyone who refused to submit. The war. The message arrived on every human communication channel simultaneously. High Counselor Zeltar's image appeared across human space, his ancient features showing the strain of 18 months of continuous warfare. "Humans of Earth and the outer colonies," Zeltar began, "your resistance has caused enough suffering. The Galactic Council offers one final opportunity for peaceful resolution. Surrender immediately, and your species will be granted client status under direct Council supervision. Continue this futile rebellion and face complete extinction." Admiral Wright watched the transmission from her command bunker on Luna. The threat was clear, but something in Zeltar's manner suggested desperation rather than confidence. "What do our intelligence networks report about Council preparations?" General Davis brought up classified reports from deep behind enemy lines. "They're mobilizing everything. Ancient weapon systems that haven't been used in millennia, planet killer devices, biological warfare that could sterilize entire star systems. They're preparing for genocide," Wright realized. President Henderson's response was broadcast 12 hours later. Standing in the ruins of the Washington Monument with the scarred Earth visible behind him, he delivered humanity's answer to the galaxy. "High Counselor Zeltar, you offer us slavery disguised as mercy. You threaten us with extinction for the crime of wanting to remain free. We have one response to your ultimatum. We will not kneel. We will not submit. We will not surrender. If you want to destroy us, you'll have to look us in the eye while you do it." The transmission ended with images of human forces across the galaxy, battered ships still flying their flags, soldiers still fighting despite impossible odds, civilians working in hidden factories to produce weapons for their defenders. Kethvar watched Henderson's speech with a growing sense of doom. The humans were going to fight to the very end, and the Council was prepared to grant them that wish. "Ambassador," his aide reported, "the Council has activated Protocol 7. All member species are required to contribute forces for the final assault on human space." Protocol 7 hadn't been used in over 3,000 years. It represented the total mobilization of galactic civilization for war. Thousands of ships from hundreds of worlds would converge on human space in an armada large enough to conquer galaxies. But Kethvar noticed something troubling in the mobilization reports. Several key species were responding slowly to the call. Others were providing minimal forces. The unity that had once characterized Council responses was fracturing. On the Torth homeworld, massive demonstrations demanded withdrawal from the anti-human alliance. The Mandari government issued a statement declaring neutrality. Even some Zentari colonies were questioning the wisdom of genocide as state policy. Dr. Chen worked frantically in her hidden laboratory on Europa. The research station had been carved out of the moon's ice crust and powered by geothermal energy from the core. It was completely invisible to Council sensors, allowing her team to work on humanity's most desperate project. The quantum resonance cascade is theoretically possible, she explained to Dr. Murphy and their team of volunteers. If we can destabilize the Council's central command network, we might be able to cause a system-wide communications breakdown. What are the risks? Murphy asked. Complete failure, which leaves us no worse off than we are now, Chen replied. Or success, which might disable every advanced technological system in Council space for weeks. The implications were staggering. The Council's member species depended on advanced technology for everything from food production to life support. A cascade failure could cause civilian casualties on a massive scale. Dr. Chen, one of her assistants said quietly, if we do this, millions of innocent people might die. Chen was quiet for a long moment. If we don't do this, humanity dies. And after us, every other species that ever dares to question Council authority. Sometimes the choice isn't between good and evil. Sometimes it's between bad and worse. Meanwhile, Captain Brooks led a desperate mission to the heart of Council space. His objective was the ancient homeworld of the Eldari, the species that had founded the Galactic Council 10,000 years ago. Intelligence suggested that the planet contained the master control systems for Council military technology. Brooks' force consisted of volunteers from dozens of species. Humans, Torth, Kilvani, Mandarin, and even some Zentari who had become convinced that the Council represented everything they had once opposed. All ships, Brooks transmitted as they approached the heavily defended system. We know the odds. We know most of us won't survive this, but we also know that someone has to try. Freedom isn't free, and it's time to pay the price. The defenses of the Eldari homeworld were legendary. Orbital platforms with enough firepower to destroy fleets. Energy shields that could stop any known weapon. Automated systems that had been perfected over millennia. But the mixed species assault force brought something the defenses weren't designed to handle. Complete tactical unpredictability. Human ships used suicide ramming attacks to clear paths for Torth heavy artillery. Kelvani stealth vessels delivered Mandari boarding parties to critical installations. Zentari defectors provided technical expertise to disable alien defensive systems. The battle raged for 6 hours before Brooks' force finally penetrated the planetary defenses. But the cost was enormous. Over 80% of the attacking ships were destroyed or disabled. Kethavar received reports of the Eldari system battle with mounting horror. The humans and their allies had actually reached the most sacred world in Council space. Ancient monuments that had stood for millennia were burning. The planetary capital was under siege for the first time in recorded history. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're losing contact with Council forces throughout the galaxy. Something is interfering with our command networks. Dr. Chen's quantum cascade was working. Across Council space, advanced technological systems were failing in carefully calculated sequences. Military communications went down first, followed by logistics networks, then civilian infrastructure. The effect was chaos on a galactic scale. Council fleets found themselves cut off from central command. Supply lines collapsed. Member species that had depended on Council technology for basic necessities faced immediate crises. Admiral Wright watched the cascade effects from her command center. Status report on Council military responses? They're fragmenting, her intelligence officer replied. Without central coordination, individual species are making their own decisions. Some are continuing the attack, others are withdrawing to protect their home systems. The galaxy's largest military alliance was dissolving into confusion and panic, but Wright knew the victory would be temporary. Once the Council adapted to the cascade effects, they would return with even more overwhelming force. President Henderson made the decision that would define humanity's legacy. Admiral Wright, implement Final Protocol. It's time to gamble everything. Final Protocol was humanity's most desperate plan. Every remaining human ship would concentrate for a direct assault on the Council homeworld itself. It was a one-way mission with almost no chance of success, but it would send a message that would echo through galactic history. Mr. President, Wright asked, are you certain? If this fails, there won't be a second chance. Admiral, Henderson replied, we've already accomplished more than anyone thought possible. We've shown the galaxy that the Council can be fought. We've inspired dozens of species to question their servitude. Even if we lose now, the idea of freedom will survive. Kethavar stood on the observation deck of his ship, watching the quantum cascade effects ripple through space like aurora in the night sky. Technology that had maintained galactic civilization for 10,000 years was failing all around them. In the distance, he could see the lights of human ships gathering for their final assault. They were hopelessly outnumbered, flying vessels held together with spare parts and determination, but they were still coming. For the first time since the war began, Kethavar understood what the humans had been trying to tell them. It wasn't about military victory or technological superiority. It was about the willingness to stand up for what you believed in. No matter what the cost, the humans had lost almost everything. Their homeworld was scarred. Their fleets were shattered. Their population had been decimated. But they had gained something that no amount of council technology could provide: the knowledge that they had never surrendered their principles. As the final battle approached, Kethavar faced a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Continue serving a system that maintained peace through the threat of genocide, or find the courage to stand with those who believed that some things were worth dying for. The quantum cascade continued to spread, carrying with it the promise of change and the terror of chaos. The galaxy would never be the same, regardless of who won the final battle. The only question was whether that change would lead to freedom or to an even more oppressive form of control. The final battle began at the edge of the Council's home system. Admiral Wright led what remained of humanity's combined fleets in a desperate charge toward the ancient world that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. Behind her flew ships from a dozen species that had chosen freedom over safety. Kethavar watched from the bridge of his vessel as the human force approached. 300 ships against the thousands that defended the Council homeworld. It should have been a slaughter. But something was different about this attack. The humans weren't trying to win in any conventional sense. They were trying to reach the planet's surface, and they were willing to sacrifice everything to do it. Ship after ship threw itself at the defensive lines, clearing paths for the vessels behind them. Captain Brooks, to all vessels, came the transmission that would be remembered across the galaxy. We're not going home, but we're going to make sure they never forget we were here. For every human who died believing in freedom, for every species that dreams of independence, remember us. The response came from every ship in the human fleet. Hundreds of voices speaking dozens of languages, united in two simple words: remember us. Kethavar felt something break inside his chest as he watched the slaughter unfold. The humans and their allies were dying by the thousands, but they kept coming. Every destroyed ship bought a few more meters of advance for the survivors. Dr. Chen's voice came through on an emergency frequency. All ships, the quantum cascade is reaching critical phase. Council systems throughout the galaxy are going offline. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now. Admiral Wright's flagship, the Defiant Spirit, was critically damaged, but still flying. Half her crew was dead. Life support was failing and her weapons were destroyed. But she was less than 1,000 kilometers from the Council homeworld surface. This is Admiral Susan Wright to any human forces still capable of receiving transmission. She broadcast. We've come farther than anyone thought possible. We've shown the galaxy that the human spirit cannot be broken. Our children will grow up knowing that their parents never surrendered. The Defiant Spirit's final approach was a masterpiece of desperation and courage. Using emergency thrusters and gravitational momentum, Wright managed to reach the planet's atmosphere before her ship finally broke apart. Her last transmission was directed at the Council chamber itself. High Counselor Zeltar, this is Admiral Susan Wright of the Free Human Forces. You wanted to teach the galaxy about the price of defiance. Consider this lesson complete. The explosion when the Defiant Spirit's reactor detonated lit up the Council homeworld's sky like a second sun. It was visible from space, a declaration that humanity had reached the very heart of galactic civilization. Captain Brooks survived the approach, but his ship was a wreck held together by emergency seals and prayers. He managed to land in the ruins of what had once been the Council's primary communications center, destroyed in the opening minutes of the assault. As he stepped out of his dying ship, Brooks found himself face to face with a group of Zentari ground forces. Their weapons were trained on him, but something in their expressions had changed. Human, the Zentari commander said, your forces are destroyed. Your fleet is scattered. Your homeworld is under siege. Why do you continue to fight? Brooks smiled through the blood running down his face. Because someone has to. Because freedom isn't something you can give up and get back later. Because our children deserve better than a galaxy where might makes right. The Zentari commander lowered his weapon. I had a son, he said quietly. Before the council decided that Zentari families were inefficient. Before they decided our traditions were primitive. I had forgotten what it felt like to fight for something you believe in. Across the council homeworld, similar scenes were playing out. Human survivors were making contact with beings who had forgotten what rebellion looked like. The sight of humans dying rather than surrendering was awakening something that millennia of council rule had tried to suppress. Kethvar received an emergency communication from High Counselor Zeltar. The ancient leader appeared haggard, his usually perfect composure cracking under the strain of watching his civilization burn. Ambassador, Zeltar said, the cascade effects are spreading beyond our ability to control. Our member species are declaring independence throughout the galaxy. Some are demanding war crimes trials for council leadership. Others are simply cutting all communication and withdrawing from galactic civilization entirely. What are your orders? Kethvar asked, though he wasn't sure he would follow them anymore. End this. Use whatever means necessary. The humans must be stopped before their example destroys everything we've built. But as Kethvar looked at the tactical displays showing the chaos spreading across the galaxy, he realized it was already too late. The humans had accomplished something that seemed impossible. They had made an entire galaxy remember what it meant to be free. Dr. Chen worked frantically in her ruined laboratory as counsel. Forces closed in on her position. The quantum cascade was consuming her equipment, but she had one final message to transmit to human forces throughout the galaxy. This is Dr. Lisa Chen to all human survivors. The cascade has exceeded all projections. Council technology is failing on hundreds of worlds. But remember, we didn't fight this war to destroy civilization. We fought it to prove that freedom is possible. Help the species that want independence. Show them that humans can be trusted allies, not conquerors. The laboratory's power systems failed just as Chen finished her transmission. Outside, she could hear the sounds of council forces breaking through the final defenses. But her message was already spreading through the human communication network, carried by quantum entanglement to every surviving human ship. President Henderson stood in the ruins of the White House, watching council ships descend through Earth's atmosphere. The orbital defenses were gone, the moon bases had fallen, and the planet's surface installations were under siege. Mr. President, General Davis said, the evacuation shuttles are ready. We can get you to the hidden bases in the asteroid belt. Henderson shook his head. No, General. If this is the end, then Earth's government dies with Earth. Someone needs to witness what they do to us. The final assault on Earth was swift and terrible. Council forces, frustrated by months of impossible human resistance, showed no mercy. But even as the planet burned, human resistance continued. Underground bunkers launched final strikes against the invaders. Individual humans with improvised weapons fought in the ruins of their cities. Kethvar landed with the occupation forces and found himself walking through the devastated streets of what had once been humanity's capital. Bodies lay everywhere, humans who had fought to the very end rather than surrender. But what shattered Kethvar forever was what he found in a school basement. A group of human children, maybe 10 years old, had barricaded themselves in with their teacher. When council forces broke through the barricade, they expected to find cowering victims. Instead, they found a classroom. The teacher, a woman named Sarah Martinez, was calmly explaining to her students why their parents had chosen to fight. The soldiers wanted us to give up being human, she told the children. They wanted us to forget our stories, our dreams, our right to choose our own future. Your mothers and fathers said no because they knew you deserved better. One of the children, a boy no older than 8, looked up at Kethvar with eyes that held no fear, only curiosity. Are you one of the aliens who thinks we're too stupid to take care of ourselves? Kethvar stared at the child, unable to speak. Here was a being who would never grow up, whose species was being systematically destroyed, and yet he showed no hatred. Only a simple question that cut to the heart of everything Kethvar had believed. Kethvar began, then stopped. How do you explain to a child that your entire civilization was built on the belief that his people were too primitive to govern themselves? The teacher stood up, placing herself between the children and the soldiers. If you're going to kill us, do it quickly. Don't make them suffer for the crime of being born human. The council commander raised his weapon, but Kethvar found himself stepping forward. Wait, Ambassador? The commander asked, confused. Kethvar looked around the classroom. On the walls were pictures the children had drawn, images of space, of alien worlds, of humans and aliens working together. Dreams of a future that would never come to pass. Let them go, Kethvar said quietly. Sir, our orders are to eliminate all human resistance. These are children, Kethvar replied, his voice growing stronger. They're not resistance. They're the future we're destroying. The standoff continued for several minutes before Kethvar made a decision that would haunt the council for generations. He activated his communicator and broadcast on all frequencies. This is Ambassador Kethvar to all council forces. I am ordering an immediate ceasefire. Any commander who continues offensive operations will answer to me personally. The response was immediate chaos. Council forces throughout human space suddenly found themselves without clear orders. Some commanders continued their attacks, others pulled back in confusion. High Counselor Zeltar's image appeared on Kethvar's communicator. Ambassador, you are exceeding your authority. Rescind that order immediately. No, Kethvar replied, surprising himself with his certainty. High Counselor, I have